Right, welcome everybody. Good morning still, afternoon I think it is, yes. 11:15. Welcome to our second talk of the morning. We will be having one again a little bit later, and that is going to be with Dr. Nadine Weimer. But first we want to get into sustainable foraging with Lindy Taverner, the owner of Wild Food, if I'm not mistaken, a progressive company promoting the use of edible indigenous plants and incorporating things like edible seaweeds and plants and organic produce into a plant-based diet. Questions and answers after the talk. Lindy, the stage is yours.
Welcome, everyone. I'm from Wild Food. I'm here to talk about seaweeds and other wild plants that we have along our shores. Okay, seaweeds are a superfood. They're incredibly mineral-dense macroalgae and sources of calcium, all the vitamins A to K, iron, and it's actually one of the few vegetable sources of vitamin B12. It's also an incredible source of iodine, so that helps with our thyroid, but actually also helps with our balancing our hormones. So it's a very important vegetable, a sea vegetable. Okay. Seaweed, I came across, first of all, the love of it because I was teaching snorkeling, and my overseas clients used to always ask me, can you eat that? Can you eat that? And then I knew the seaweed names, but I had to experiment with what tasted better, and then my clients wanted me to make it for them, and it kind of grew from there. And then did a bit of an online course and studied it and just developed a real passion for seaweed. And then it started to extend into the other wild plants on our shores. It is quite amazing. In the dunes and in our driveways and gravel roads, we've just got so many plants that are really, really good for us right there. And they're really sustainable. They grow fast. I mean, kelp grows up to 10 millimeters a day. And most seaweeds grow really fast because they're in this mineral-rich ocean that feeds them. Okay, a little bit of history on seaweeds. I'm sure you know, obviously, Japan and China has been having seaweed for thousands of years. And somewhere along the line, our Western nations seem to have lost some of the knowledge. I think it's got to do with industrialization. And we were working, and then we lost our knowledge of foraging, and then we had to buy our food. So I think that's where it happened. But in Iceland, it was eaten since 1960 BC, 800 years ago. It was talked about in Chinese poetry, so that's a long time. This is really cool. In Hawaii, the nobility used to have seaweed gardens, when only the most delectable seaweeds were grown, and then they'd take out the bad seaweeds and put in only the delicious seaweeds. So, and then as you learn about foraging, you start learning about what tastes nicer and what are your favorite ones. But it's all very subjective. Everyone's different. Like in talking a little bit more about history, the nori, which is, I'll show you. This type of seaweed over here, it's called purple lava or porphyra or nori, and that's a seaweed you're almost familiar with because it's dried and pressed to make sushi wraps. And it tastes absolutely delicious. It's got 35% of it is actually protein. So you can actually survive eating nori. And in places like Ireland and Wales and Scotland, especially during famine, this is how the family survived. And in the cold and the snow, if they could get nori still at the beach, boil it up in a pot until it makes a paste, and then you add a bit of oats and put it in the oven and make a bread. And that's how they could feed their children and survived. And it's actually arguably the best tasting seaweed in the world. And I think that's because of the protein content, and it's really delicious it's about processing it right. So added heat to it is what makes it so nice. I'm sure you've probably all tried you get the nori crackers that you can buy at Woolworths, but it's actually so much nicer fresh. You can get it off the rocks all around our shores here. It's like a black-purple color, and as you can see, like this, and and you can harvest it off the rocks when it's all dry, because all of our seaweeds, they are evolved to be they're intertidal species, so they can be exposed to the air for up to 12 hours easily. And then when they get water on them, then they just go wet again. So you can harvest them dry. And different ways of keeping your seaweed would be you'd either dry it in the sun, and then if it's not folded over, it doesn't decompose. They just dry, or dehydrator, and then you can dry them in the oven, and then that actually takes the moisture out, and then you can keep them indefinitely in an airtight jar. Seaweeds you can keep in the fridge for up to a week. All of our seaweeds are cold water seaweeds, so as long as they stay really cold, they're okay. But pretty much if you haven't processed them yet, after a few days, you just put them in the freezer. Seaweed's actually even nicer after it's been frozen because it breaks down some of the cell walls, so it's actually even softer. Okay, and I've jumped around with the seaweed. I'm going to just chat to you a bit about sustainable foraging. It's if you are going to start foraging, it's really important to start making sure you get from a non-polluted area. So with regards to seaweed foraging, you can look online and just make sure there are no sewage outlets right where you're foraging. Just try and be out of those areas. And then collecting what you need, of course. And when you take it from the rocks, just leave at least half there. The root is called a holdfast, where it holds onto the rock. And if you do that, it just keeps growing. And then next month or next week when you go back, it'll still be there. And for other people to forage. Pretty much just respect all the wildlife. So as you're walking on the rocks, just be mindful of your anemones and all the other little creatures around there, not to damage them. And the big thing to stay safe, don't turn your back to the ocean. Because you never know. I mean, it can be low tide and a little bit of the water lapping, and all of a sudden a rogue wave comes. So I do sometimes... I have to forage in high tide if I haven't made low tide, but I'm used to diving and I've got a snorkel and fins and things, so you don't want to be swept out to sea. Okay, we've got roughly around 850 species just here in this Cape Town, Western Cape region, which is a lot. And I'll just touch on a few species today. They're all edible, except for one. And it's actually just a matter of learning how to process them, and then what your favorites are. So the only one you can't eat is something called acidweed. It's a light brown seaweed, kind of like the color of kelp, but it's much thinner. I've never actually seen it. I've only seen pictures of it. And it's a light brown color with serrated edges and these little fingers. It really needs to be, it only survives in extremely cold water. So it's more something you might see on the West Coast. And you can always tell when acidweed's around because as it's exposed to air, it starts to disintegrate because it's got sulfuric acid in it. And then if it touches a rock, it'll make an imprint of itself on the rock, etched in. So it looks like Bushman paintings. So if you come across rocks that are full of these white marks everywhere, then you know acidweed's been there. And it burns other seaweeds, so there's no other seaweed around. So otherwise, the only other problem is really decomposing. So try and always you harvest your seaweeds while it's still attached to something, and then it hasn't started to decompose. Otherwise, it's edible. Then you just can start. You can look online or get hold of me. I'm always happy to share all of my knowledge, and that's how I learned. It's about tasting it like that, boiling it, baking it, or fermenting it. Those are the different things that you can do with seaweed to keep them and also to get the best flavor out. So you get 3 types of seaweed. You've got brown seaweeds, green seaweeds, and red seaweeds. Brown seaweeds, there's so many. I don't have them all here, but you get a delicious, crunchy one called rack. You get right off the ocean. It looks all thin. Usually I eat them after I get off the rocks from diving. And kelp. Well, obviously you guys all know kelp, okay? So this is just, it's a leaf of a kelp. They call the leaves fronds. And then the trunk is called a stipe. So you see them all along our coast here. And the stipe is actually hollow. so that the kelp on in a high tide stands up and the fronds get exposed to sunlight because they need photosynthesis. That's why you get kelp only along the shore, not right out to sea, because the leaves need to get enough sunlight to be able to be processed. So what I do with people in my workshops is I'll show them how to harvest the seaweed. You always go for kelp that's a lighter color because it's younger and softer. When it goes really thick, it takes a lot of boiling because it gets tougher, but that just means it's quite old. And if there's been a really warm current come through, that's when it looks a little bit mottled. And that's because it started to decompose, because kelp needs to be in really cold water. So that's why after Hermanus, as you go down the coast, you see less and less kelp, because it likes to be in very cold water. So if you want to cook kelp, what you do is you chop the pieces that you need, if you want it to be like a lasagna sheet size, or chop it into noodles, or you can slice it in the middle, because this kelp is made up of 2 sheets that are flat like this. So you can slice it in the middle and make ravioli pockets, or you can wrap it around food to make cannelloni. So how you process kelp is you have a pot of boiling water, and you put in a bit of vinegar or lemon juice, and you boil it for 10 minutes, and then what you're left with is a gluten-free pasta. And it's so much like pasta, so much so that it actually doesn't have a huge amount of taste. Like pasta, you actually almost need to cook it with some sauce. So once I've processed it, I'll cook it in some tomato sauce or some mushroom sauce, or just olive oil and salt gives it a bit of flavor. And kelp absorbs, like pasta, it absorbs the flavors around it. So in a lasagna, it'll absorb the tomato and the spinach flavor and mushrooms. Ravioli pockets are also, I'll cut, then boil it, because it's easier to cut when it's hard like this, and then stuff it and put it back in the oven with some sauce and heat it up. And it's absolutely delicious. It's quite a delicacy. It's really hard to imagine, but I teach about 100 people a month at the moment with my workshops, and people never cease to be completely amazed at how good seaweed can actually taste. And some of the people are dragged by their partners, and they think that I'm going to give them a bowl of smelly seaweed, but it's nothing like that at all. The key is to learn that seaweed can accompany your food and give it they call it umami. It's a 5th flavor, and it's actually to enhance the flavor of your food, like a herb or a spice, as well as giving it the nutrition often that your food needs. So those are subtleties of seaweed. It's not about throwing a whole lot of seaweed on your plate and forcing yourself to eat it. It's learning how to use seaweed to make your food taste better. Okay, and I mean, it's incredible. I mean, kelp is incredible. It's so amazing because in summer, it'll actually produce more vitamin C for you, and in winter, it produces more vitamin D, which is actually what your body's needing in winter. So kelp's evolved alongside humans. So yeah, I mean, and I love kelp. Also, when you're diving and you don't have a wetsuit on, it's nice and warm, you can hold on to it. Okay, so kelp's got a lot of minerals, vitamins, trace elements, iodine, potassium. The only contraindication would be if you've got hypothyroidism and your body produces too much iodine, then you don't want to be having kelp, because then it's the same as you wouldn't have seafood either, because it actually raises the iodine levels in your body. But, you can still have it every day in small amounts when it's been processed, because that does reduce the iodine. And so much I've learned actually from just the clients that come and see me from all around the world. Like I had one client from the Dominican Republic, and she was the one who told me that she ate kelp every day growing up, and with the boiling water, instead of the vinegar, which is what I knew, they used to just squeeze a lemon in. And then what that does basically is it clarifies it and takes out any of that stinky seaweedness, So it doesn't taste or smell like seaweed anymore. It just brings out that umami flavor. So when you take it out, the green juice is left. But I mean, kelp is used also so much in beauty products and in medicine, more than we realize. So if you sometimes go and get a medicinal shampoo for your head and your scalp, it'll often actually have kelp in it because it's really good for your skin. And there's a lot of beauty creams coming out nowadays that's got kelp, and you can use it as a face mask, and that's just a start. Okay, so that we've got brown seaweeds. Then you've got just touching on the surface here. We've also got green seaweeds. They're called chlorophyta. There's quite a lot of wide variety. You're probably most familiar with this. When you swim along our shores here, there's a bright green seaweed that's at the bottom. You'll see it all along here in Camps Bay and Hout Bay and anywhere you go, and Sea Point. It's called sea lettuce. It's very edible. You can eat it just like it is. I find it a little bit hard. So what I do is I chop it up and add a bit of like balsamic or lemon juice to it just to soften it a bit. Another way of softening it is to actually just put it in the oven or boil it, and then it softens. And then actually applying heat to it, same as with most seaweeds, and it brings out the flavor, and it makes it easier for us to absorb. And I mean, sea lettuce is incredibly high in vitamin C. It's also got calcium, iron, magnesium, and protein in it. So there's a reason, millions of Asians can't be wrong. You know what I mean? They know, and we've just lost the knowledge, and it's crazy. One of the seaweeds that is easier to show you dried, this is called cladophora, and when it's growing on the bottom, it just looks like hair floating around. Now, this is also incredibly mineral rich, and you can get, it grows in seawater and in fresh water. So I think sometimes we get a bit grossed out about it because you see it growing in sewage pipes. But if you get it from a freshwater river or lake, or you harvest it from the ocean, it's perfect. You just dry it out, and then you can chop it up and add it to your food as flavoring. What they do in like Vietnam, they call it kai, and in Laos, they call it kai po. And you just chop, and then what they do is they harvest and they farm it up the rivers, and then just chop it up with a bit of garlic, and then they dry it like that in the sun, and then when it's ready to be used, they just throw it in and stir fries and cook it up. So, yeah, it's been so much fun learning about these different types of seaweeds. The big one at the moment, and there's a huge fad about it, is red seaweeds. So we get something here called red ribbons, Surya vittata. So it grows on kelp. So you'll see these red things growing on kelp when you see it on the beach. So, and it doesn't decompose. It actually just dries out and it goes white. So you can use it either way, red or white. The nice thing about it going white is that it doesn't have a seaweed smell or flavor anymore. So you don't actually eat red seaweeds. You boil them up to get the gel out. And it's the gel that's really good for you. So first of all, it's used in a lot of medicines as a binding agent, and a lot of beauty products as a binding agent, and medicine, and in science. So red seaweeds make agar, which is like your vegan gelatin. So all your agar comes from your red seaweeds. And so one of my favorite recipes, you can take a big handful of this and put it in a pot of water and boil it up with some fruit and spices and make a delicious jelly that you can eat. And then you just sieve out the bits, and then the jelly is what's left. You can keep that jelly in your fridge, or you can freeze it, and then it just defrosts afterwards. So now the big hoo-ha at the moment, and it's been actually knowledge for about 50 years, Dr. Sebi discovered that sea moss, he calls the version that's a little bit further up the coast is called Chondrus crispus, but it looks and is exactly the same as our species. And if you've heard about the sea moss benefits, and it's quite the superfood in that it has 92 of the 102 minerals that your body actually needs, and most of the vitamins. So just a humble seaweed like this, once you've extracted the gel, has got, it's good for your thyroid health, balance your hormones, gut health. So it's a prebiotic. It actually, the gel relines your stomach lining. So if you've got a gastric or a hole in your stomach lining or something like that, but it actually helps with your stomach lining, so better gut health is a better body. Immunity. So this has got phytochemicals in it, so it's antiviral and antifungal. So I think the huge increase in sea moss usage at the moment is because of COVID and people wanting to build their immunity. Very good for blood sugar control. So it's had a lot of testing in helping people with diabetes. It reduces your insulin resistance. And there's been proven that it can help treat cancer and prevent Parkinson's. So this knowledge has been around for a while, but possibly suppressed. I don't know. But I think more and more, you're going to now that I've pointed it out, you're going to see sea moss everywhere. It's also good for your heart. Omega-3 fatty acids. It's a blood thinner. It helps with oxygen in your blood because it's got potassium. So it can also be good for anxiety and depression. So it's crazy, really. The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know anything. So I want to show you a couple of other really interesting seaweeds. This is something that's called slippery orbit. Also, if you're in the water and you see these big sheets sort of floating around at the bottom of in the low tide, this slippery orbit, it comes in big round sheets as well and does get broken up. It's slippery when you touch it when it's wet, but when it dries, it's actually like a piece of plastic. So you can just pass around a piece. And that can be, if you chop it up in your food, it's like a thickener. You can make gravy. But the best, one of the popular uses for it is it's a natural tin foil. So you can wrap your vegetables, or if you eat fish, your fish, and vegetables and put it in the oven, or you can wrap your vegetables on the braai. You might have to put a piece of string around it, but it actually, the hotter it gets, the harder it gets. And then you can, so for my workshops, I'll wrap my zucchinis and other vegetables and then put them on the braai, and then it keeps the juices in them so that it can, whatever you're cooking doesn't get burnt and dried out. So anyway, it's a good party trick. Same as with kelp. Another good party trick is the bamboo, or the actual stipe. It's, as I said, it's hollow inside. So you can cut the end. So you've got the one end is sealed. You cut off the leaves or the fronds, and then it's hollow inside. So you can stuff your vegetables inside and put a stone or more seaweed on the other end, and then cook that on the hot coals. And it's a natural steam pot. So what I do for workshops is I stuff the kelp bulb full of vegetables and then put it on the coals. And then after about 20 minutes, all the veggies are cooked. And then we just slice it open and put that on the table. And it's hard to believe until you actually do it. So the only thing you must remember is not to add salt, because you're obviously going to get salt from the kelp. And you don't actually eat that bulb, it's hard. So it works really nicely as a pot. But I think if you're on the beach and you're having a fire, it's quite a nice thing to do. And I'm not even going to go into all the beauty stuff. I mean, kelp and slippery orbit, it's great as a face mask. You get these seaweeds that look like a tongue. This is hard now, so you'd use it on your foot as an exfoliator. But when it's really soft, you can use it as a face exfoliator. So I always say to clients, if we have an apocalypse, you still have beauty products. And a lot of the seaweeds actually have got a gel in them you can use on your face. So, okay, cool. And one more of the looking, what haven't I showed you? You even get like this green seaweed called felty fingers. They look awful, but they get really big, and they feel like felt, green felt. And if you deep fry these, they're even nicer than calamari. It's a vegan calamari. So it's quite fun. We just put a little bit of batter and deep fry them, and we serve them as these crunchy rings and fingers. That they're really nice. And you also chop it up and add it to your food to make it taste better. So once you can harness this knowledge, there's so much you can do, especially if you're plant-based, to bring nutrition and diversity into your meals. So I'll just end off just saying that I touched the surface of the seaweeds, but we've also got so many dune plants. We've got dune spinach, we've got sea parsley, and that's on the dunes, and you can eat it as is, and it tastes amazing. And it's all over the country in South Africa. We're very blessed with the plants that we have. And so many of our green plants, as you start to learn about them, are also very nutritious. Like something like this is called a sun rose. I actually noticed that the stall over there has got it as a display in a pot plant. And it's delicious. And I've got a whole lot now because my friend's driveway, it was growing all along her driveway. And then when I learned, she didn't even know. I said, look, this is food, and you can eat it as is. And with a lot of these green plants, you can also just stir fry them up or blanch them, and then they're ready to go. And I think what's happened in our diets is that we've become so used to things tasting salty or sugary, we don't realize that there's all these other flavors. And in a minute, it takes you a minute to get used to, but it's really nice. So yeah, there's a world out there to learn from. It's all very healthy, very accessible. You don't need money, you just need knowledge. Okay, so if you have any questions, you're free to come and ask, and happy foraging. Yeah. Okay.
Let's see if there are any questions from the audience for Lindy. Anybody with a question? Hand up if you have one. Nobody? All happy? Oh, there's one. Off you go.
Hello.
Hi.
Where are you based? Where do you do your workshops?
I'm in Scarborough, which is right on the southern peninsula of Cape Town. So we border Cape Point. So I'm very lucky because there it's quite pristine and fresh and So what I do is take people on the beach there, and we can harvest seaweeds. And then our house, we've got a clay house facing the reserve, and people come back to the house and learn how to process the seaweeds. We'll boil up the kelp and do the kelp bulbs, and then they have like a 4-course meal all prepared. So you get to taste seaweed when it tastes its best. Yeah.
It's also one of the more beautiful parts of Cape Town, driving through Scarborough.
Yeah.
Short drive, but stunning. Yes, sir.
So when you're going to make a book with pictures?
I know. People ask me that a lot. I need to get my act together. I'm collecting pictures. And then I've got all the info, and that's the next step. I know. It's just time management.
You should write it on seaweed leaves. That'd be fun. Yes, sir.
Lindy, there's lots of seaweed lying all over the beach. At what stage do you go, actually no, and I need it to be fresh?
Okay, so don't do it unless it's a red seaweed, because red seaweeds don't decompose. They just go white because they've still got the gel inside of them. So, your red seaweeds go white, and that would be something you'd boil up for the gel. But all the other seaweeds don't do it. Rather, just make sure they're still attached. So if it's still attached to something, a rock or the seabed or something, then it's fine. Because once it's actually washed up on the beach, you don't know how long it's been floating around for and if it started to decompose. So you go at low tide, and then you cut it while or harvest it off the rocks or the rock pools in low tide.
So what you're saying, no, you can't walk around on the beach munching on seaweed, no?
No, it's not worth it. You don't know how long it might have just washed up, but it might have been floating around for a long time.
Yeah, here's another one.
Sorry, just following that with if it's floating on the surface, the green slime, what was the green one called?
This one, Cladophora kai.
Yes,
Yeah.
that one I see floating quite a lot in estuaries and that. So is
Yes.
that all unusable that's floating? Because we've got tons of it floating.
Well, it should really be still attached to the ground, to the bottom, or to a rock. Yeah, because if it's floating, you don't know how long hasn't been living. Because once the green and your brown seaweeds, once they're not attached and they're floating, they can start to decompose. Yeah.
Are there any uses for the ones that are, or potentially decompose, the ones that are
Yes,
floating?
it's fantastic for your garden. So one of the biggest uses of kelp in Cape Town is a company called Kelpack, and they harvest tons of kelp every day, and then they process it to make fertilizer. So what we do at home, because I've always got a lot of excess seaweed, is we just dig a hole in the garden, put the seaweed in, and then you add water to it, and then cover it up. And then it decomposes in there, and it's got so many really amazing nutrients for plants as for us. You see, the plants know it. So plants that are growing around it, the roots will actually find the nutrients they need from the seaweed. Or you just put the seaweed in a bucket with some water and let it start to ferment, and then that water then becomes a seaweed tea, and that you can pour on your plants.
Oh, I thought we could drink them. Okay.
So yeah, plants love. I mean, they can have it decomposed, and it's incredible. That's actually the number one use of seaweed from South Africa is actually for plants.
Oh, wonderful. Anything else? Any other questions? No? Oh, there we go. One more.
Actually, just a big thank you from my side. I know now if there's an apocalypse or I get stranded on a
Yes.
deserted island, I will be okay. Thank you so much. Very
Okay, sure.
insightful.
No, thanks. It's a pleasure. No
Wonderful.
problem.
Lindy Taverner, everybody. Round of applause for her.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.